Hello, I'm going to go ahead and get started now. I realize that maybe some people might join a little bit later, but I think you can, for those who join us afterward, can get caught up at any time. I'd just like to ask for those who are attending virtually to please keep your microphones on mute for me, please. And if you have questions along the way, if you could put them in the chat box, we'll try to answer those either as they come up or towards the end of my presentation. We have some people online and a few people in person here as well. This is our first time for me to do a little bit of hybrid kind of discussion, so I appreciate your patience as I look at different directions and as I go through this presentation. But I'm very excited to have you join me here today. I'm here today to talk about the process of becoming a Foreign Service officer, how to be a part of U.S. diplomacy overseas and in the United States. I'm going to focus largely on the process on how to become a Foreign Service generalist, a Foreign Service officer, and I'll talk about a little bit about other hiring paths and routes that are in the State Department, as well as sharing some of my personal experiences of what it is to be a U.S. diplomat overseas. All of the information I'm going to be giving today, aside from the personal anecdotes, are all available online. If you haven't already visited, please visit CareersStategov. I'll say that multiple times through this conversation, but CareersStategov is the best resource for learning about Foreign Service careers and careers with the U.S. Department of State. So it's just a little bit of background about myself. Greetings from a beautiful spring day in Perth, Western Australia. I know that some folks are joining us from all over Australia virtually as well. Hello, hope you're doing well wherever you are. My name is Matt Hafner. I'm the consular officer here at the U.S. Consulate General in Perth. I've been in Perth now for just over a year. This is my fourth assignment with the U.S. Department of State, and I've been in the State Department for a little over 9 years. Prior to joining the State Department, I was a graduate student living in Tokyo, Japan. And then I went through the process I'm going to describe in more detail later to become a Foreign Service officer in July 2012. I moved my family all back to Washington, D.C. area to start training. I spent about a year in training, both functional training, orientation, and French language training, and went to my first assignment in Nouakchott, Mauritania. I'd be very impressed if anyone has ever been to Nouakchott, Mauritania, but it's in West Africa, kind of between Morocco and Senegal, and kind of hugged by Mali on the side. I was the consular officer there for 2 years, and then I went to my next assignment, which was in Tokyo, Japan. Quite a big change from Islamic Northwest Africa to East Asia and Japan. For me, a little bit familiar because I've lived in Japan for many years before I joined the State Department. I served as the consular officer, or one of the vice consuls there in our consular section, handling visa applications, U.S. citizen services, the broad range of all the things we do for U.S. citizens and visa applicants overseas. After Tokyo, I served my first mid-level assignment, which I'll talk about in more detail later. I was the visa chief and fraud prevention manager in Kathmandu, Nepal. I was there for 3 years. The first 2 years, slightly more normal assignment. Then the last part with COVID and related evacuations, the job content changed quite a bit from routine processing of visas to assisting U.S. citizens depart Nepal. Helped organize 2 U.S. charter evacuation flights out of Nepal back to the United States. As you all remember, the first part of 2020 was very big time, a lot of changes in our day-to-day work. Learned a lot more about virtual work as well. And then I came to Perth in August 2020 and have been here since. And I'll be here for a total of 3 years. I'm joined by my family, my wife and 2 children. And what I like best about being a Foreign Service officer, first and foremost, is the work I do, I know, makes a difference. I've helped make my country safer through the processing of visas. I've stopped terrorists from trying to enter the United States through the visa process. I did, of course, stop them, but certainly didn't give them a visa. I've helped U.S. citizens in dire times, such as the COVID evacuations, helped people process their life events, documents, reported on interest in aspects of the country. On the family side, it's been wonderful for my children. They're gaining international education, international experience, learning to be resilient and tough young folks. At the end, I'll talk about what are some of the realities and challenges, but overall, I'd say the Foreign Service lifestyle has been very good for me, and I hope you'll consider this as we talk through the rest of the presentation. Okay. For those who are just joining now, like I said, if you haven't been already, CareersStategov. But I want to start here by reading the State Department's Diversity and Inclusion Statement. The U.S. Department of State, our country's leading foreign policy agency, provides rich international experience, whether at home or abroad, and opportunities to become responsible leaders. Each day, our employees make a difference as they contribute to global society and defend and advance our nation's interests and values. They work on the business of diplomacy and on high priority issues that impact the safety, security, and prosperity of our world: human rights, environment, energy, food security, public health, and technology, all while experiencing a unique career. Our talented workforce reflects and champions all our strengths and diversity, personal, professional, educational. We offer a workplace that values and rewards leadership, collaboration, and innovation, and personal and professional development. So that is our diversity inclusion statement. You may be wondering what it is that the U.S. mission to Australia does here in Australia. Our embassy is in Canberra, and we have consulates in Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. We have 3 kind of overarching goals that we do here in Australia. The goal number 1 is we enhance the security at home and abroad through a strengthened U.S. ties with Australia. We advance the economic prosperity of our 2 countries by expanding both the scope of U.S. goods and services and 2-way investment flows. And we seek to, through the U.S.-Australia alliance, improve security, prosperity, and governance in the Indo-Pacific region. So certainly if you follow the news, busy times, very busy and prosperous times for the U.S.-Australia alliance. So we say, as you can imagine, very busy even in these times of lockdowns or working at home or various different operations. But I'm here today to talk to you about how to become a Foreign Service officer. I wanted to read our diversity and inclusion statement because we need people to join the Foreign Service who reflect, look like, act like, and reflect the totality of the American experience of being U.S. citizens. We need people from diverse backgrounds, different ideas. We want to have a more inclusive, more diverse workforce that really shows who America is and not just one part of America. So to become a Foreign Service officer, the first step is to take the Foreign Service Officer exam, Foreign Service Officer test, and the upcoming window is in October next month, which is why we are having this presentation in time today before the end of the registration period. The testing window is October 2 to 9th in next month. Registration for the test this cycle opened on the 26th and closes on the 30th. So we're about 8 days out from the registration deadline. There are multiple ways to take the Foreign Service Officer exam. Back when I did it, I actually went to the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo and sat in what is their kind of press conference room and sat in front of a computer and took the test there. Now there's this contract the State Department uses through person view. There are places to take it in Western Australia in 4 different locations. As for other parts of Australia, if they're functioning during the lockdown, I can't exactly say, but at least through this information, you'll have resources if you do decide to take it in the next window in the future. But do look at our website, CareersStategov, and you'll see a link to register for the exam, which will take you to the right website to get logged in and potentially taking the test during this cycle. Please note, you cannot take it though at the consulate or at the embassy. There's different sites where you will take that. So before you register for the Foreign Service, I want to talk a little bit more about what a Foreign Service generalist is. So I'm a Foreign Service officer. We have Foreign Service specialists as well. So as an officer, as we register for the test, we have to decide which, and this is an odd terminology that we use, you have to decide which cone or career track you want to follow. And there are 5 different cones: consular, political, economic, public diplomacy, and management. As a generalist, it would be expected that you could serve in any of those cones, but in general in your career, if you're consular coned, it'd be expected you would serve most of your tours as a consular officer. So on the website, there's a little kind of self-assessment test. It's not definitive, of course. You can choose which cone you want when you actually sign up, but it kind of helps, gives you some ideas that might reflect your interests better. If you're interested in immigration, it might be that you're more geared for consular. If you are interested in logistics, procurement, it might be that more management is your route. And to talk a little bit about what each does, so on consular, which I'm consular cone and I'm most familiar with, we assist U.S. citizens overseas. We help implement the U.S. immigration process through the processing of visas overseas. We're involved in policy issues such as adoptions, child abduction related issues, fair treatment for U.S. citizens. Consular work can be very, at times we have a routine where we process applications, but at the same time we don't know what's going to come in every day if there's an emergency or a crisis. And we're often the first responders in the chance of a crisis in the country. Try to get messaging out to U.S. citizens, whether it be changes to COVID-related restrictions in Australia, large-scale protests, natural disasters. This is where we try to get that information out to U.S. citizens. If you are, as you're listening as well, if we're going to plug for our website, we update our COVID-19 related information at least every week and sometimes more depending on changes, as things do change fairly rapidly during these times. If you haven't checked it out already, au.usembassy.gov, and there's a COVID-19 system page. Management. So management are the folks that keep the embassy running internally. They do the procurements, process, they seek housing for the officers coming in, they make sure the bills are paid, purchase items, process human resources related things, payrolls, all that thing, everything that needs to be done to keep the embassy running and going. They also work with the host government on issues such as schooling issues for international schools, accreditation, reciprocity, a lot of diplomacy they do as well. The political officers report on the political happenings in the country, especially as they relate to U.S. foreign policy. They maintain relationships with political parties, both the parties in power, the parties in not, keep up to date on the military relationships between the United States and other countries. They report on what's happening, the kind of behind the story that you might read in the news. And they also help plan the logistics of the State Department principals or principals from other agencies who might be coming to visit that country. On the economic side, it's similar in that regard, but more the economic focus, looking at economic opportunities for U.S. companies, working with the commercial services to promote investment in the United States, also supporting VIP visits. Political and economic tend to be closely related, but a little bit different focus. And then public diplomacy, they want the spokes people for the embassy. They work with the press, try to get our information out, hold cultural events, help put together presentations such as this with my colleague in public affairs who's helping me work in the computer as we speak. So there's a lot of different options, different cones. Every Foreign Service officer in their first part of their career does a consular tour, whether it's 1 year or 2. So everyone experiences consular work, but they definitely try now to get more people experience in their cone, to use our terms, in their entry-level career. And as I said before, there's kind of a test you can take to see, what your interest might be as you're registering for the exam. Outside of being a Foreign Service Officer Generalist, we also have specialty tracks, which have a different hiring process. In administration, we have financial management, general service, human resources specialties. In construction, we have construction managers who oversee large projects such as the building of new embassies and new consulates. We have facility managers who maintain our facilities. On the information technology side, we have information technology specialists, people who are specialized in radio technology, and then those who keep our IT infrastructure going. For people interested in English language, we have regional English language officers who help promote English language education, and regional public engagement specialists. And on the law enforcement, we have the Diplomatic Security Service. That includes our diplomatic security special agents who serve as the State Department's principal law enforcement officers overseas, providing protection, investigations, a full range of law enforcement services. We also have diplomatic couriers and security engineering specialists who help keep our security infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, safe. In medical, we have nurse practitioners, regional medical officers who are doctors, regional psychiatrists, and lab specialists who specialize in putting all the lab equipment together. And we also have office management specialists who provide support to the ambassador, the DCM, our political sections, our regional security office sections all over the world. Unlike the Foreign Service Officer exam for specialists, they're hired through a different process. It's more of a traditional application process, but for there you'll check USAjobs.gov. In the Foreign Service, that was USAjobs.gov if you're interested in one of our Foreign Service specialty tracks. And those recruitments either happen on a rolling basis or as there are vacancies. I think it might be a office management specialty application window that might still be open, or it's closing very shortly. In the Foreign Service, we also have the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, the Foreign Commercial Service, which does have a presence in Australia, and the Foreign Agricultural Service. They are also part of the Foreign Service, but I would refer you to their websites to get some more information about working for USAID, FCS, for the Foreign Agricultural Service. If you're interested in working, not necessarily as a Foreign Service position, but looking for full-time employment if you're a resident of Australia, you can also check our website, au.usembassy.gov, for various openings we have at our embassies and consulates. But those kind of jobs aren't necessarily ones where you'll transfer every few years, but more like permanent positions at the embassy or consulate. Okay, so I went through that a little bit quickly. I try not to go into too much detail, but now I want to talk a little bit about how the process works to become a Foreign Service officer, kind of walking through those steps. I realize some of the stuff, since I've done it, has changed a little bit, so I tried to research this and get it as detailed as possible. But the first thing you do is you register for the exam. You go to CareersStategov and pull the thing, and then you choose the career track or cone you're most interested in. And the great thing about CareersStategov is there's many resources available to help prepare for the exam. You can find a practice test online. You can find some suggested reading lists, some information about the test, the career, all the various aspects they're looking at when they're looking to hire foreign service officers. For the folks who are here today, I printed out the suggested reading list, and those who emailed us in advance, I think today we sent out some of those handouts that had some suggested readings in there. And as you sign up for the exam, you have to complete some personal narratives in 6 areas: leadership skills, interpersonal skills, communication skills, management skills, intellectual skills, and substantive knowledge. These are little short essays that you'll have to write. Each one's no more than 1,300 characters. Back in my day, when I was hired, we did this process, but we did it slightly later on, and we didn't have to do it up front. And for those in the Foreign Service, we recognize these skills immediately because these are the criteria in which we are evaluated on every year as part of our annual evaluation cycle for promotions, tenuring, etc. So, and the 1,300 characters, one of the most important skills a Foreign Service officer has is being very pithy, concise, getting the context down to the bare minimum, getting the impact to the most important part. So we learn to be very good at writing very short, but hopefully very impactful sentences. I know it's not my strongest point, but many Foreign Service officers are very good at this, and you will not believe how good most Foreign Service officers are at writing. So you've done that, you've registered for the test, you've completed your narrative, submitted your package, signed up, got your test date. And the next step is to take the Foreign Service officer exam. And that test on that day will consist of 4 parts. There's a job knowledge test, which is very broad. If you like trivia, you'll probably really like that part of the test. It covers a wide range of topics from history, economics, world affairs, US culture, history, math to some extent. It's a very wide and broad test. And some of those suggested readings will help you kind of prepare yourself mentally for it. I think it's very important every day to read the newspaper. For me, it's reading the Washington Post, but staying up on current affairs. The Economist is one that's popular to keep up with, New York Times, things like that. And then the next part is the English language exam. A lot of what we do relies on speaking and writing, so we have to make sure that you have a strong knowledge of the English language. I think a great book to read in advance of that test is Elements of Style, giving that a quick reread just to re-familiarize yourself with those grammar rules. And then there's the the situational judgment part of the test. They give you some choices and you have to answer them. It's kind of hard to explain. It's one of those, you have a scenario and you try to evaluate it. What I would recommend really there is to take the practice exam to get a kind of feel for that. And then after you've done those 3 tests, you have to write an essay. And you don't have a lot of time. You get a prompt and you write your essay. It'll be on a topic related to the Foreign Service, whether it be trade, negotiations, international relations, something like that. It doesn't matter necessarily what you argue, but that your argument is coherent and can follow a logical flow. But you don't have a lot of time to think. You just have to get there and just start writing. So you've taken the test. Generally, I think now after the exam, you get the results fairly quickly. When I took it, it was within 3 weeks, and I think it's gotten faster since then. And if you pass the exam, what you then go on to is called the Qualifications Evaluation Panel, the QEP. And here, they're going to look at those personal narratives you wrote when you registered the test and the essay you wrote as part of the exam. And as part of this evaluation process, they're going to evaluate what you wrote in your personal narratives against what are called the 13 dimensions. Those are on CareersStategov, and in the handout I gave you. As I'm going to read out this list, it's going to sound like more than 13 because some of them are ended together, but those are composure, cultural adaptability, experience and motivation, information integration and analysis, initiative and leadership, judgment, objectivity, integrity, oral communication, planning and organizing, resourcefulness, working with others, written communication, and quantitative analysis. So as you're writing your personal narrative statements as part of your registration process, I think it's a great idea to look over those 13 dimensions and see how your experiences and things you're highlighting in your essays really reflect those 13 dimensions, because the QAP is going to be looking at those narratives to see how you've demonstrated those 13 dimensions. So the next step, if you've passed through the evaluation panel, you go on to the Foreign Service oral assessment. Not everyone who takes the test will get to this far, but that's the next step in the process. The oral assessments are generally held in Washington, D.C., though they can be held in other locations such as San Francisco and Chicago. During these COVID time periods, I know there had been a little bit of delay in those, but I know they've resumed them and are going forward with those. I took mine in Washington, D.C. Way back in 2011. That day, honestly, it's very stressful because it's a very full day and you're being evaluated all day long. And unlike the other parts of the process where there's a time gap between pass or fail, at the end of the oral assessment, that day you know whether you're going to move forward in the process or not. When I went to take mine, I was sitting in this room with just the most qualified people I'd ever seen. They were lawyers, PhD students. I'm from a small town in Oklahoma, so everything to me seemed very fancy. So, I was lucky enough to get through the process and pass the first time I went through it. But you meet some just very interesting people. It is stressful, so if you do go to that point, the best piece of advice I got in advance is just relax. Talk to people to get the nerves out of your system, because you're just going to meet some amazingly qualified people. But if you've made it this far too, that means you're amazingly qualified too. So you belong in the room. So don't feel overwhelmed by the other folks that are there, because there's some amazing people there. But the oral assessment is broken up into 3 parts. The first part is a group exercise where you're in a group of people. You're given a kind of a common issue you might experience at an embassy, and you're each given a different role, and you have to work through and come up with a solution to the problem, like advice, guidance, or suggestions for the ambassador. Once you go through that process, then one by one you'll give a debrief on the discussion to one of the evaluators. So the evaluators will observe the group exercise, you'll complete it, and then after one by one you'll kind of go through the debrief process. Being able to quickly explain, summarize discussions is certainly something we all have to do every day in the Foreign Service. Another part is the personal interview, where they'll ask you questions about your motivations for why you want to join the Foreign Service, your relevant experience. This part is, I think, more similar to a job interview. And then they'll ask you a series of hypothetical questions, range for how would you react to a stressful situation or a cultural situation. those kind of hypothetical type situations. And then there is a memo you have to write. You're given a large binder of information that you have to condense into a short memo that explains the overall situation. It is a lot that you have to condense very short, but often that's the reality of Foreign Service life, is synthesizing a large amount of information into something actionable or easy to comprehend so that a principal can make an informed decision. Those process, they're not in any set order. Some people in your group, the people testing the same day might do the memo first, they might do the what else? The interview part first. It'll kind of vary on the day-to-day. But it is an all-day event, and it can be fairly intense. When I did it, we got there at 5 in the morning, not 5 in the morning, that's what time I woke up. I got there at about 7:30, and I didn't leave until 5:30 that night. As I said, you find out you pass or whether you got a sufficient score to move forward in the process or not. They grade you on a scale of 0 to 7, and you have to get a higher than a 5.25 to pass into the next section. So basically 5.3 is the passing score. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to pass every section. It's just an average of the 3 scores. So you might do really well in the interview, have a little bit of trouble with the essay, but still pass on. From my personal experience, I passed each part, but with just barely enough score to pass each part. So it was definitely a nerve-wracking day. I couldn't believe it when they told me I passed and moved on. So the next step, so you've passed the written test, you've passed the interview, and the next part you have to go through, and that starts from that night after you pass the oral exams, as you go through, start the security clearance process. You have to be able to obtain a top secret security clearance from the US government. I can't really say how that process works, how they make those decisions, but if you're going through a security clearance investigation, you have to be upfront and honest with the investigator. Don't try to hide anything. Not everything is adverse, but if you did something but didn't tell the investigator and the investigator find out, that would probably not look good for a security clearance investigation. And then we also have to get a medical clearance. And when you are hired, you have to have a worldwide available medical clearance so that you can go anywhere in the world. And as part of that, after you pass the oral assessment, you sign an agreement to be worldwide available. It doesn't mean you're going to go anywhere in the world or you're going to get sent to a very difficult place without your family on your first tour or anything like that, but you do have to be worldwide available when you are hired. There are many different study guides out there. There's online communities. If you Google Foreign Service, you'll find a lot of different sources of information. The official one, of course, is CareersStategov, but if you search out there, I'm sure you can find a lot of different resources. So you've had your medical clearance, you've had your security clearance, and then you go to a suitability review panel in Washington, D.C. If they make the final decision on whether you go onto the hiring register. I don't really know, other than that happens in D.C., what that process is like. But after you pass all those things, have your security clearance, get through the suitability review, you go on what's called the hiring register. And I wish I could tell you that getting on the hiring register was an automatic offer of employment, but unfortunately it is not. You get put on a hiring register based on your score from your oral assessment. So the register is a dynamic list of all the people who passed on to that point, and their rank order is based on their score on the oral assessment. So when I joined the register, I was number 100 of 100 on the consular register. So I thought, oh, okay, It's very hard to get hired on the first try. I better start another candidacy for the next year. But there are a few ways that you can raise your score. First one is through if you have a veterans preference. Veterans get a certain amount of point bumps. If you check out our website, you get those details. And then through proficiency in a foreign language. So for me, I was already living in Japan at the time and had been living in Japan for a while. For me, the easiest part of the whole hiring process was the Japanese phone test I took with our institute. My score was sufficient, so I got a bump in score, which moved me much higher on the register towards the top, and then fortunate to get a job offer later on. But there are certain scores that are in critical need for the department. We call them recruitment languages. So you can get a higher bonus for the following languages: Azerbaijani, Bengali, Chinese, Hindi, Kazakh, Korean, Kyrgyz, Nepali, Pashto, Persian, Punjabi, Russian, Sinhalese, Tamil, Telugu, Turkish, Turkmen, Urdu, and Uzbek. So if you happen to speak one of those languages, you can get a higher bonus on your score, which would make you more competitive in the hiring part. But if you accept the higher bump for one of those languages, it comes with a requirement to serve in a posting that uses those languages. Some of them might be very specific to one country, whereas others might have multiple places where you might be able to serve and use that language. Chinese comes to mind. So you've got on the register, and so our HR bureau, which we call the Global Talent Management Bureau, monitors that register, and then when they have hiring authority to hire a cohort of new foreign service officers, they'll pull from the needs from the various cones. There's a register for each cone. There's consular register, management, econ, political, and public affairs, and they'll invite those folks to what we call colloquially A100. It's the name of the Foreign Service Officer Orientation course. I believe A100 was the former room number in which the class was held, but we joined what's called A100. I was what was the second to last cohort of the Diplomacy 3.0 initiative under Secretary Clinton. So I had a very large cohort in my A100 class. We were 90 some odd people, and we go through 6 weeks of orientation at the Foreign Service Institute in Arlington, Virginia. When you join the Foreign Service, you're a career candidate, and you have 5 years to show that you are ready to be a tenured full-time Foreign Service officer. So our first 2 assignments are directed by our human resources folks. They tell you where you're going to go. In my case, in the first week of A100, they sent us all a list of the available positions. And then we had about 2 or 3 weeks to chew over that list, to look at it. We had more people, we had more postings on the list than we had people in our class. So there's 100-some jobs for 90-some people. We look it over, we talk it over with our families, we think about our personal and career preferences, our desires to learn a language, and we come up with, at my time, it was a preference where we basically did a bell curve of 25% highs, 50% mediums, and 25% lows. And we submit them to our assignments officer, and then they make that decision for us, and they tell us where we're going. And at the end of the 5th week of our orientation, we have what we call Flag Day. It's a very exciting, if a little emotional day, where they tell us what we're going to be doing for the next 2 to 3 years, whether it's a year of training or going directly to your assignment. And we all sit in a large auditorium, our families can attend, and they call us up one by one, and they give us our flag for the country of our assignments. Some people are extremely excited, As you can imagine, some people are a little apprehensive because maybe that wasn't their top choice, but the assignments officers are making these decisions based on what's open, what the needs of the services are, doing their best to take into account the family and personal preferences of the individual officers. But in my situation, my class had 90-some people, and I was the very last person called. So everyone else was going up and celebrating, and I kept waiting, checking my list, like, oh, nope, nope, nope. And I was the very last person called, so it was gave me a good anecdote about my experience, but the person who was handing out our flags was our current U.S. ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, so I have a great photo with her receiving my Mauritania flag. So in that first 5 years, you'll generally have done 2 assignments. You don't have to speak a foreign language when you start, but as a condition of being tenured, you have to demonstrate proficiency in a foreign language, and they do their best to make sure you do that. If you don't come in speaking a language already or have a high enough tested score, you will very likely get a language designated assignment before your first tour, or possibly for your second. So in my case, I went and I studied French for 30 weeks at the Foreign Service Institute. They're teaching many different languages there. We had folks learning Nepali. They teach Hausa, Kinyarwanda, French, Spanish, German. You hear many different languages walking around the Foreign Service Institute. Of course, Chinese, Japanese, Arabic. And most people, it sounds a little bit scary to think you have to get tenured. You get 3 opportunities at being tenured. First at your 3-year mark, second at your 4-year mark, and then once again at the 4.5-year mark. It's quite common. Tenure, it's definitely over 95% of people are tenured. The people who are not, it's either a language issue or some other conduct performance issue that's fairly severe. But the vast majority of people do get tenured. For Foreign Service officers, there's no education requirement either. You have to be over the age of 20, but you have to be hired before the age of 60. This is per the Foreign Service Act. That being said, most Foreign Service officers have been to university. If not, most have higher degrees, masters, PhDs. There are many lawyers in the State Department or people who practice law who no longer wish to practice law and want to work in the Foreign Service. But you don't have to have a college degree to become a Foreign Service officer. In my case, I was a graduate student and I was hired straight out of grad school. So that there's no requirement there. And we have mandatory retirement at the age of 65. These are all per the statutes of the Foreign Service Act. For those interested in working for diplomatic security, they have to be hired by the age of 37, and I think these are standards across all federal law enforcement, such as the FBI, etc. And then once you go through that tenure process, for our assignments afterwards, we go through a competitive bidding process where we bid on posts. It's based on timing, medical clearance issues, the post desire, grade, rank, a lot of different factors come involved on bidding. As you can imagine, bidding assignments in Australia is very popular. This is a wonderful place to live and serve. We have a great relationship with Australia, so a lot of people want to come here. There are many challenging assignments in other parts of the world to incentivize bidding on some posts. We get hardship pay in certain places, danger pay, if posts meet certain criteria. Certain posts are hard to staff, so they give incentive programs to serve at them, especially to extend for a longer period of time. So that's kind of the general process on how to become a Foreign Service officer. I think what drives at least which I hope at least drives most foreign service officers first and foremost, is a desire to serve our country. You know, we represent the United States overseas. For me, you know, it's a great opportunity to give back to my country. You know, I feel patriotic in what I do. I certainly know that not every time is perfect. We have a lot of growth to do as a country, and I feel like I can be a part of that process by serving the public. I think to be a Foreign Service officer, it requires, this is just my own personal view, but it requires quite a bit of personal resilience. We go through some of the most stressful situations people can go through, and we do it frequently. We have to move a lot. We have to operate in foreign language environments. For those with families, uprooting children from schools, these can all be very stressful. Promotions are a very competitive process, and bidding, like, these are not unstressful things. These are bad double negative, but it certainly takes a certain amount of personal resilience to keep, you know, putting through these stressful situations. Some of the realities of this lifestyle also means you move a lot. So you get used to packing up boxes and unpacking, and you realize, why do I need so much stuff? Maybe I don't need all of this stuff, and I can find a way to economize, but that's of course personal preference. And then you can miss some life events. For right now, a little difficult to travel. I'm not able to see, you know, my brand new niece, but you know, hopefully soon I can travel again. But there are times in the Foreign Service, just the nature of what we do, that we just miss things back home. It has definitely gotten a lot easier to serve overseas with Amazon. We can get things through diplomatic mail, Netflix, many ways to stay connected back to home. Easier now than, say, it would have been, you know, 30 or 40 years in the past. But so far for me, I think I've had a very exciting, interesting career. You get to see a different side of every society you're in. When I was in Japan, I lived there for a long time, then I came back to serve in the Foreign Service, saw a very different part of Japan I'd never seen before. Sometimes you know what's really happening in the world, you know, the behind the headlines kind of news. You can also quickly read the headlines. Oh no, that's not quite that's not quite actually what's happening. That's very exciting at times. You also discover, you know, your own strengths, and you find yourself in situations you never thought you'd encounter. Opportunities to travel once, you know, the world goes back to a little bit how it was, and really great opportunities to serve your country, make a difference, and have a rewarding, very interesting career. So I think I will stop there.